The courthouse was always buzzing with energy, a place where everyone seemed to believe they were at the center of some pivotal story. For me, it was a place where I excelled. My name is Logan Creighton, and I've spent 15 years building a reputation as a tough, no-nonsense defense lawyer in Boston. My life had always been organized, precise, and, for the most part, under control. At 43, I was the epitome of professionalism. Every suit I wore was perfectly tailored. My arguments in court were sharp and convincing. I knew how to project confidence, even when doubt threatened to creep in. But on that Friday evening, as I left the courtroom with my briefcase in hand, my mind still filled with legal jargon, I had no idea that everything I had worked for was about to crumble. It all started the moment I stepped through the door of our two-story colonial home. The familiar scent of lemon-scented cleaner filled the air, but something about it felt off, too clinical, like the house had been scrubbed with a little too much haste. My wife, Nicole, stood in the kitchen with her back to me, humming a tune that was unfamiliar. She was wearing a dress I didn't recognize. It was sleek, black, and way too elegant for a quiet dinner at home. "Hey, Jess," I called out, setting my briefcase down by the door. "What's the occasion?" I asked, noticing her slightly forced smile. She turned to face me. "Just wanted to surprise you," she said, motioning to the table set for two. Candles flickered on the polished surface, and a bottle of our favorite Chianti stood uncorked. "I thought we could enjoy a nice evening together," she added. I smiled, but there was something unsettling in the way she spoke. "Sounds perfect," I replied, loosening my tie. "Let me just wash up." Upstairs, I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the weight of the day. But as I glanced into the mirror, I noticed something that hadn't been there before: uncertainty. Maybe it was the way Nicole had rushed to prepare the dinner, or the way she had avoided looking me in the eyes. Something didn't feel right. Downstairs, dinner was awkwardly quiet. Nicole mentioned spending the day volunteering at the hospital, throwing out names of people I didn't know as if she expected me to remember them. I nodded along, sipping my wine, but the nagging feeling that something was off wouldn't go away. After the meal, Nicole excused herself to make coffee. That's when I noticed her phone buzzing on the counter. The name on the screen was unfamiliar: Marcus' office. My hand hovered over the phone. Nicole and I had always given each other privacy, but something urged me to pick it up. "Marcus," I muttered under my breath as I opened the message thread. What I saw hit me hard, deeper than words could describe. Messages about meetings that never happened. Excuses for late nights that didn't add up. The photos told the whole story. Nicole was with a man I didn't know, his arm wrapped around her waist. Their faces were too close, far too close to be innocent. I set the phone down with trembling hands, just as Nicole returned with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Here you go," she said, her smile bright but strained. I stared at her, the woman I had loved and trusted for 2 decades, and realized I didn't truly know her anymore. "Thanks," I said, forcing a smile as I took the cup. But the bitterness of the coffee couldn't hide the bitter taste of betrayal rising in my throat. That night, after I discovered the texts, sleep barely came to me. Nicole lay beside me, her breathing slow and steady, but my mind was a whirlwind. Questions I couldn't shake flooded my thoughts. Who was Marcus? How long had this been happening? Had I been too blind, caught up in my own world while she found solace with someone else? By morning, I'd made up my mind. I wouldn't confront her just yet. I needed to gather the facts, the hard evidence. It was the lawyer in me, the need to have everything in place before taking any action. After all, you don't accuse someone without proof. When I arrived at the office, my assistant Lisa greeted me with her usual professionalism. "Good morning, Mr. Creighton. Your 10 o'clock is in conference room B, and the filing for the Pearson case is due by 3. "Thanks," I said, barely hearing her. I closed the door to my office, dropped my briefcase onto the desk, and slumped into my chair. My work, which had always kept me grounded, suddenly felt like a distant memory, irrelevant. I picked up my phone and made a call I never thought I'd make. I dialed a private investigator. The voice on the other end was clear and no nonsense. "James Dutton Investigations. How can we help?" "My name is Logan Creighton," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need some surveillance done." "Discretion is critical," he replied. I gave him the details: Nicole, her potential affair, and the name Marcus. By the end of the call, I had hired someone to dig into my life. It felt like a betrayal in itself, but I convinced myself it was necessary. That evening, I came home late. Nicole was curled up on the couch in the living room, reading a book. The scene was so normal, so domestic, it almost made me laugh. How could someone be so serene while leading a double life? "Long day?" she asked, glancing up. Always, I replied, shrugging off my coat. What about you? Quiet, she said, closing her book. I went to the store and then had lunch with Vanessa. Vanessa? I repeated, making a mental note of the name to pass along to the investigator. Every detail mattered now. She smiled, stood, and walked over to me, placing a hand on my chest. You've been working so hard. We should get away, just the two of us. What do you think? My stomach tightened. Sounds good, I said, forcing a smile. Maybe after this big case. She kissed my cheek and headed upstairs. I stood there, staring at the spot where she'd been, feeling like a stranger in my own home. Over the next week, the investigators' updates started rolling in. Nicole was seeing Marcus often. Lunchtime meetups at a downtown hotel, late-night phone calls, even a weekend errand that turned into a full-day spin at his apartment. The details painted a picture I didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. But the most shocking part? Marcus wasn't just a random fling. He was one of my firm's biggest clients, a CEO I'd met several times at networking events. The betrayal felt deeper now, more deliberate. Nicole wasn't just cheating, she was doing it with someone tied to me in a way that made it feel personal. That Saturday, I told Nicole I had to work late. But instead of heading to the office, I parked 2 blocks away from the hotel where she and Marcus had met twice that week. I sat there, watching the entrance, until I saw her. She walked out, her hand brushing his arm, her laughter clear even through my rolled-up window. He opened the door to his sleek black Porsche, and she slid in, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she belonged there. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded in my chest, but I stayed still. I wouldn't let emotions drive my actions. Facts would. I followed them. They drove to a fancy restaurant across town, a place Nicole had once said was too expensive for us to go to. I parked a block away and waited. I didn't go inside. That wasn't part of the plan. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed James Dutton. It's Creighton, I said. I've got a location for you. They're together now. The restaurant on Green Street, La Bellevue. We're on it, James replied. Stay put. You'll have what you need soon. I hung up and looked through the restaurant's glowing windows. Inside, Nicole sat with Marcus, leaning across the table, her face glowing in the candlelight. I wondered what lies she had told him about me. That I worked too much? That I didn't understand her? Whatever the story, it didn't matter now. I had given her 20 years of my life, and she had traded them for secrets and lies. My phone buzzed with a message from Lisa, my assistant. Reminder, meeting with Marcus Backer on Monday at 10 a.m. The irony of it all almost made me laugh. I typed back a single word, confirmed. Monday morning arrived with a heaviness in my chest. As I walked into the office, the familiar routine of my workday felt foreign. Now, I was a man living 2 lives, the composed attorney everyone knew, and the broken husband who barely recognized the life he had built. Lisa greeted me as usual, holding a folder. Mr. Backer is already in conference room A. He mentioned reviewing contracts for the upcoming merger. Thanks, Lisa, I said, my voice steady even though I was anything but calm. I adjusted my tie in the reflection of the glass door before stepping into the room. There he was, Marcus Backer, the man who was both my client and my wife's lover. He looked up, all polished confidence, his suit perfectly tailored, his grin wide and easy. Logan, he said, standing to shake my hand. Good to see you. You too, Marcus, I replied, gripping his hand firmly. Let's get to it. The meeting went as expected, business as usual. But all I could think about was the man sitting across from me, the one who had been sharing my life without me even knowing. Marcus went over the details of the merger, and I provided my legal input. It was second nature to me, work I could do with my eyes closed. But every time I looked at him, I had to fight the urge to strike. When the meeting ended, Marcus stayed behind, still losing that effortless charm. You know, Logan, he said, leaning back in his chair, I've been meaning to ask. How do you juggle everything, your career, the family? Nicole always speaks so highly of you. I froze. On the surface, his words sounded innocent enough, but there was something off, an underlying taunt. Did he know I had discovered the truth? Was he toying with me? Or was this just a sick idea of a game? I'm lucky, I replied, keeping my voice calm. Nicole's a great partner. She keeps things running smoothly. His grin widened, but his eyes remained unreadable. You're a fortunate man, he said, almost too casually. Later that day, James Dutton, the investigator, called. His tone was crisp, like always, but I could hear the gravity in his voice. I've got what you asked for, he said. Hotel receipts, credit card statements, and a timeline that leaves no room for doubt. She's been seeing him for over a year, Logan, and it's not just casual. I felt my stomach tighten, already bracing for what I knew was coming. What do you mean? I asked, though I already feared the answer. She's planning something, James continued. She's been meeting with a divorce attorney, a big name in family law. If she files, this guy will go for the jugular. Full custody, alimony, the house, everything. The words struck like a physical blow. It wasn't just an affair. It was a full-on attack. Thanks, James, I said, my voice tight with suppressed rage. Send me everything. It's on its way, he replied. One more thing. Backer's more involved than you think. Financially, emotionally, it's all tied up in this. As I hung up, cold clarity settled over me. Nicole and Marcus weren't just having an affair. They were systematically tearing my life apart, piece by piece. That evening, Nicole greeted me with her usual smile. Dinner was on the table, the house smelling of rosemary and garlic. It was almost cruel, the normalcy of it all. How was your day? She asked, pouring me a glass of wine. Busy, I replied, watching her closely. Yours? Good, she said, sitting across from me. Vanessa and I went to that new gallery downtown. You'd love it. Lots of dramatic landscapes. Vanessa? I repeated, my mind already racing. How many lies had she spun around this supposed friend? We ate in silence, Nicole chatting about trivial things, her voice light and carefree. But I couldn't help noticing the subtle signs, the way her eyes flicked to her phone whenever it buzzed, the slight tension in her shoulders when I asked about her day. After dinner, while Nicole was upstairs, I retrieved her phone from the kitchen counter. I didn't need her password anymore. James had already given me the evidence, but I wanted to see it with my own eyes, to feel the sting of her betrayal one more time. There it was. Messages to Marcus confirming their next meeting. Plans to finalize everything by the end of the month. The words were simple, ordinary, but devastating. I returned the phone exactly where I found it and went upstairs. Nicole was already in bed, reading, her face calm. Coming to bed? She asked, smiling up at me. Soon, I said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. Just need to wrap up a few things for work. Her smile didn't falter, but for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Fear? Guilt? Either way, it didn't matter. She'd made her choice. At my desk, I opened the file James had sent. Photos, bank statements, emails, the evidence was undeniable. It wasn't just an affair. Nicole and Marcus were building a future together, one that didn't include me. I stared at the documents until the words blurred, then closed the folder and leaned back in my chair. The weight of it all pressed down on me, but beneath the anger and the pain, a new sense of resolve began to take shape. Nicole and Marcus thought they were in control. They thought they could tear my life apart and walk away without consequences. They were wrong. The next few days passed in a blur. My routine didn't change: court hearings, client meetings, dinners at home with Nicole, but beneath the surface, everything was different. I was no longer just a husband going through the motions. I was a lawyer building a case. Each night, after Nicole fell asleep, I sifted through the evidence James Dutton had gathered. Hotel receipts, credit card charges, surveillance photos, every piece fit together, and the picture it painted was damning. Nicole and Marcus had been planning this for months, maybe even longer. What stung the most wasn't just the affair itself, but the cold, calculated nature of it all. They had used me, my career, my resources as tools to lay the groundwork for their escape. And they were preparing to take everything: the house, the finances, even custody of our daughter, Emily. Everything was on the line. Thursday morning, James called with another update. I've traced the financials, he said. Nicole's been siphoning money from your joint account into a separate one for over a year, and Marcus has been contributing to it from his company. Looks like he's trying to cover his tracks. Anything else? I asked, my voice tight. Yeah, James responded after a pause. Nicole's meeting with her attorney tomorrow. I'll send you the details. I hung up and stared at the calendar on my desk. Tomorrow was the deadline. After that, things would be in motion, and the odds would shift in their favor. That night, I made my move. Nicole was asleep, her breathing soft and steady, when I slipped out of bed and went downstairs. At my desk, I opened a secured laptop I'd borrowed from a tech-savvy friend who owed me a favor. For the next 2 hours, I drafted a plan, a strategy that wasn't just about protecting myself, but about turning the tables on Nicole and Marcus. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was taking control. The first step was the house. Nicole thought she'd walk away with it, but I had other plans. By the end of the night, I had transferred the title into a trust, one she couldn't access without my approval. It was a move she wouldn't see coming, and it gave me leverage. Next, I secured our joint accounts, freezing them temporarily to prevent any further withdrawals. If Nicole wanted to play dirty, so could I. The final piece was Emily. I knew Nicole and Marcus would try to paint me as an absent father, too absorbed in my work to care about my family, but I had evidence to fight back. Emails, photos, even testimonials from friends and colleagues who had seen me coaching Emily's soccer games and helping her with her homework. I wasn't just fighting for custody. I was fighting for my relationship with my daughter, and I wouldn't lose. By the time I crawled back into bed, the first light of dawn was starting to creep through the curtains. Nicole stirred, her hand brushing mine. "You're up early," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, staring at the ceiling. "Work stuff." She nodded, rolling over, oblivious to the storm I was quietly preparing. The next morning, I left early, but instead of going to the office, I parked outside the law firm where Nicole's attorney worked. From my vantage point across the street, I saw her arrive, her hair perfectly styled, her steps confident. She didn't see me, but I wasn't there to see her. I was there to confirm the timeline, to see how far she was willing to go. James texted me an hour later, confirmed, she's filing Monday. The clock was ticking, but I was ready. That evening, I came home to find Nicole in the kitchen, preparing dinner. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're home early," she said. "Thought I'd surprise you," I replied, forcing a smile. As we sat down to eat, I couldn't help but study her, every gesture, every word. She talked about her day as if everything was normal, as if she hadn't spent the morning plotting to dismantle our life. "Are you okay?" she asked suddenly, her tone light but probing. "Just tired," I said, shaking my head. "Long week." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "You should take a break." "We both should. Maybe a weekend away." I smiled, the irony almost too much to bear. "Sounds nice." After dinner, I excused myself to my office, claiming I had work to catch up on. Once inside, I locked the door and began reviewing my notes. Every detail mattered now. Nicole and Marcus thought they were untouchable, that they'd covered their tracks, but they didn't understand who they were dealing with. I wasn't just a lawyer. I was a man fighting for everything I'd built, everything I loved, and I wasn't going to lose. The weekend passed in a haze of forced smiles and unspoken truths. Nicole moved through the house with her usual confidence, chatting about errands and plans, as if she weren't hiding a web of lies. I played along, knowing that my silence was my greatest weapon. Monday morning arrived like a trial date, inevitable and heavy with consequences. Nicole left the house early, claiming another meeting with Vanessa. I stayed behind, sipping coffee and watching the minutes tick by. At 10 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from James Dutton. She filed. Confirmed service date is Friday. So it was done. Nicole had set the wheels in motion. But I didn't feel anger. I felt cold determination. She thought she held all the cards, but she had no idea I had been quietly reshuffling the deck. At the office, Lisa handed me a folder as I walked in. "Your meeting with Marcus Backer is at 11, she said, her tone professional but tinged with concern. "Everything okay, Mr. Creighton?" "Perfect," I replied, flashing her a smile. "Just a busy week." Inside my office, I closed the door and reviewed the folder. Marcus's smug face stared back at me from a press clipping about his latest acquisition. The man lived for his image, polished, successful, untouchable. He had no idea what was coming. By the time 11 o'clock rolled around, I was more than ready. Marcus strolled into my office like he owned the place, his expensive suit and confident smirk only making my blood boil. "Logan," he said, extending his hand. "Good to see you." "Likewise," I replied, shaking his hand with a firm grip that made Marcus flinch. "Let's get started." We sat across from each other, the room heavy with unspoken tension. Marcus began discussing the merger, his voice smooth, rehearsed. I nodded along, making notes, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Finally, I interrupted him. "Marcus," I said, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Can I ask you something?" He frowned, caught off guard. "Of course. How long have you?" I started, watching his face closely. What are you talking about?" he stammered, his confusion obvious. "You heard me," I said, leaning back in my chair. "How long?" Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He looked around the room, as if searching for an exit, but there was none. "Logan, I think you're mistaken," he said finally, his voice shaking. "Nicole and I are. We're just friends," he added, a weak attempt to deflect. I couldn't help it. I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound that cut through the silence. "Come on, Marcus," I said, my voice cold. "Don't insult me. I know everything. The hotel rooms, the lunches, the late-night calls. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" His face turned pale, his bravado slipping away. "This isn't what you think," he mumbled. "Oh, it's exactly what I think," I replied, my tone biting. "You and Nicole have been planning this for months, maybe longer. Now you're trying to tear my life apart. But here's the thing, Marcus." I leaned in, letting the weight of my words sink in. "I don't lose." Marcus left the office an hour later, visibly shaken. He was rattled, though I had only shown him a small glimpse of the truth. Just enough to make him sweat, but not enough to reveal my full hand. He knew I wasn't backing down, and that knowledge would stay with him. That evening, I returned home to find Nicole in the living room, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I walked in, her smile faltering slightly at the sight of my expression. "Tough day?" she asked cautiously, her voice betraying her nerves. "Productive," I said, setting my briefcase down. "How about you?" "Good," she replied, though there was an edge to her tone. "I had lunch with Vanessa. She says hi." I nodded, watching her closely. She was trying to keep things normal, but I could see the cracks starting to form. She'd filed for divorce that morning, and she knew it was only a matter of time before I was served. The anticipation was eating at her, and I could feel it. After dinner, I retreated to my office, locking the door behind me. I opened the file James had sent earlier that day, scanning through the latest updates. Nicole's attorney had filed motions for full custody and spousal support, significant amounts, too. The demands were absurd, but they revealed her strategy: paint me as an absent, work-obsessed husband who couldn't prioritize his family. But I wasn't going to let that narrative stand. I had my own strategy, and it was time to execute it. I had kept meticulous records. Every soccer game I had coached, every parent-teacher meeting I had attended, every holiday spent with Emily. I had photos, emails, and testimonials to counter every lie Nicole planned to tell. More importantly, I had leverage. The trust I'd set up for the house ensured she couldn't claim it without my consent, and the financial records James had uncovered showed a clear pattern of her siphoning money into a private account. Nicole and Marcus thought they were untouchable, thought they had cornered me. But they were about to learn just how wrong they were. By the time Friday arrived, my strategy was ready. The same skills I had honed in the courtroom, shrewd, calculated, and ruthless, were now focused on the betrayal within my own home. Nicole's game had been careful and calculated, but I had learned the rules, and now I was ready to break them. At 9 a.m., a courier arrived at my office with the divorce papers. The envelope was thick, heavy with demands and accusations, and I took my time reading through it. Nicole was going for the jugular. Full custody of Emily, alimony that would drain me financially, and, of course, the house. The audacity was almost impressive, almost. "Lisa," I called out, waving her into my office. "Yes, Mr. Creighton?" she asked, looking at me expectantly. "Find a slot for an emergency meeting with Derek Riker. Today." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Your personal attorney?" "That's right," I replied, my voice steady. "We got some business to take care of." The meeting with Derek was brief but effective. He was sharp and unrelenting, the kind of lawyer who thrived in high-stakes cases. As I outlined Nicole's demands and presented the evidence I had gathered, his expression shifted from professional detachment to one of something resembling excitement. "This is solid," he said, flipping through the file James had prepared. "You're not just going to defend yourself. You're going to bury her." "That's the idea," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "I want to make it clear she doesn't get to rewrite history and walk away unscathed." Derek nodded. "We'll start with a motion to counter her custody claim. Your documentation on parenting involvement is airtight. And as for the financials," he whistled, holding up a bank statement, "this is going to hurt her case. Badly." That evening, I arrived home earlier than usual. Nicole was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, her face carefully composed, a mask of practiced calm. She glanced at me as I walked in, her smile faltering just slightly when she saw my expression. "You're home early," she said, her voice cautious. "Everything okay?" "Just wanted to spend some time with Emily," I replied, setting my briefcase by the door. Nicole's expression flickered for a brief second, but she recovered quickly. "She's in her room. I'll call you both down when dinner's ready." I nodded and made my way upstairs. Emily's door was slightly ajar, and I knocked softly before stepping in. She was sitting at her desk, headphones on, scribbling in a notebook. Hey, kiddo, I said, leaning against the doorframe. She looked up, and her face lit up in a way that made my chest ache. Dad, you're home early. I am, I said, smiling. Thought we could hang out. Maybe watch that movie you've been talking about. Her grin widened. Really? Mom said you'd be too busy. My smile faltered, but I quickly covered it. Not tonight. Tonight, I'm all yours. After dinner, Nicole retreated to the bedroom, claiming a headache, while Emily and I settled in to watch the movie. She laughed at all the right parts, her joy so pure it made me question how I'd let things get to this point. When the credits rolled, she leaned against me, her voice soft. Dad, yeah, are you and Mom okay? The question hit me like a punch. I froze, momentarily unsure how to answer. What makes you ask that? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated, picking at the edge of the blanket. I don't know. You just seem different lately. And Mom's been acting weird too, like she's hiding something. I swallowed hard, torn between protecting her from the truth and giving her the honesty she deserved. Emily, I said carefully, your mom and I are going through some things. But no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. That's a promise. She nodded, her small hand gripping mine. I know, Dad. I trust you. Later that night, after Emily was asleep, I retreated to my office and locked the door. I opened my laptop and reviewed the plan one final time. Every move had been calculated, every detail accounted for. Nicole had underestimated me, but that was her mistake. I wasn't just going to fight for what was mine. I was going to win. The morning light filtered through the windows as I sat at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in front of me. Nicole moved around the kitchen, making tea and avoiding my gaze. I could tell she was waiting for something, for me to acknowledge the envelope that had arrived on Friday. I didn't give her the satisfaction. We've got something big, James said, his voice taut with excitement. What is it? I asked, setting aside the file I'd been reviewing. There's been a breakthrough with Marcus Backer, James replied. We've got evidence linking him to some serious financial misconduct. Regulatory violations, potential fraud. The kind of stuff that could land him in real trouble. I leaned back in my chair, my pulse quickening. And Nicole? The walls are closing in on her too, James said. It's starting to look like the perfect storm. We've got everything lined up, her money trail, her plans, and now, Marcus's business dealings. If she thought she could walk away unscathed, she's in for a rude awakening. I couldn't suppress a smile. It was time to finish what I'd started. Good work, James. Keep the pressure on, I said, my mind already racing with the possibilities. I'll be in touch. After the call, I spent the rest of the day preparing. Nicole and Marcus had thought they were the ones in control, but now it was clear. Every move they had made had been part of a game I'd been playing all along. They had underestimated me. That was their mistake. Later that evening, Nicole confronted me again, this time with an almost desperate edge in her voice. What are you doing, Logan? She demanded, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and confusion. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I'm defending myself, I replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. Something you should have considered before you try to take everything from me. Her face tightened, and she clenched her fists at her sides. This isn't over. No, I said, my voice calm and steady. It's just beginning. Her defiance lingered in the room like a storm waiting to break. I could see the cracks forming. The icy confidence that had once made her so formidable was starting to melt away, replaced by frustration, anger, and perhaps even a trace of fear. She had no idea what was coming next. Marcus, too, wasn't faring much better. James's updates painted a picture of a man unraveling. The regulators had begun investigating his business, and the pressure was clearly getting to him. His once coordinated front with Nicole was beginning to fall apart, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they both cracked. That Friday, as I sat in my office preparing for a case, I received another call from James. Logan, we've got something huge, he said, his voice barely containing his excitement. I put down the case file in my hands and sat up straighter. What is it? James hesitated for a moment, then dropped the bomb. We've got the evidence. Full, undeniable proof of Marcus Backer's involvement in some serious financial misconduct. And it's linked directly to the accounts Nicole's been hiding. My heart skipped a beat. This was the breakthrough I had been waiting for. Do you have anything concrete? I asked, my mind already running through the next steps. We've got the emails, the wire transfers, the receipts, all the paperwork that ties Marcus and Nicole together. We've even got his business dealings under investigation now. thanks to some very well-placed anonymous tips. I let out a slow breath. This is it. This is the leverage we need. James's voice crackled through the line with urgency. Exactly. We can hit them both at once. The timing is perfect. I nodded, already plotting the next steps in my head. Keep everything tight for now. I'll take it from here. As the call ended, I felt the weight of everything I had worked for slowly fall into place. Nicole had made a monumental mistake. She had underestimated me, and now, with the walls closing in on both her and Marcus, she was running out of time. The strategy was clear: use their own secrets against them, and show them that I wasn't the one they should have been playing. This wasn't just about winning, it was about taking everything from them, piece by piece, until they were left with nothing. That weekend, the tension at home reached a boiling point. Nicole's nerves were frayed. She could no longer hide the cracks in her carefully constructed life. And Marcus, well, the man who had once seemed so untouchable was now trembling under the weight of his own lies. I wasn't just fighting for my family. I was fighting for everything that mattered. And I wasn't going to lose. Emails between Nicole and Marcus. The words jumped off the screen, each one more damning than the last. She had been pressuring him to move faster, to sell off assets, to transfer money, even suggesting they skip the country if things went south. She was panicking. I let out a slow breath, a mix of satisfaction and fresh anger bubbling inside me. Send me everything, I told James. Already in your inbox, James replied, his voice tinged with excitement. But there's more. I leaned forward, waiting. Backer's not as committed as she thinks, James continued. He's been communicating with a separate attorney, setting up contingencies for himself. It looks like he's ready to cut her loose if the heat gets too intense. That was the crack I needed. Good work, I said, my voice firm. Keep digging. That evening, Nicole stayed late at Vanessa's again. By now, the excuse was wearing thin, but I didn't confront her. Instead, I spent the evening with Emily, helping her with a science project. We laughed as we built her model volcano, the tension of the past weeks melting away, if only for a moment. As Emily drifted off to sleep, I sat by her bed, watching the peaceful rise and fall of her breathing. She didn't deserve any of this, none of the lies, the betrayal, or the looming custody battle. For her sake, I had to win. Nicole came home around midnight, the faint smell of wine clinging to her. I was sitting in the living room, waiting, a drink in my hand. Late night? I asked as she walked in. She stiffened, glancing at me warily. Vanessa and I had dinner, lost track of time. Of course, I said, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. You two have been spending a lot of time together. Nicole frowned, clearly unsure of my angle. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I replied, smiling faintly. Just an observation. She didn't respond, instead retreating upstairs. I stayed in the living room for a while, staring into the fire, the tension in my chest coiled tight. By Monday, the next phase of my plan was in motion. Derek had drafted a series of subpoenas targeting Marcus's financial records and communications with Nicole. The goal was clear: expose the depth of their conspiracy and dismantle it piece by piece. Marcus's reaction was swift. By midweek, James informed me that Backer had been frantically trying to reach Nicole. His tone in their recorded conversations had shifted from confidence to desperation. He was beginning to realize the cost of their actions, and it terrified him. Nicole, too, began to unravel. She was short-tempered at home, snapping at Emily over trivial things and avoiding me entirely. When she thought I wasn't looking, I caught her checking her phone, her expression a mix of anxiety and anger. The breaking point came on Thursday evening. Nicole was in the kitchen, pretending to cook, when her phone buzzed with a message. I watched her glance at it, her face paling slightly before she quickly set the phone down. What's wrong? I asked, my tone casual. Nothing, she said, her voice too quick. Just work stuff. Work, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Must be exhausting, keeping all those secrets. Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. What are you trying to say? I stood, walking over to the counter where her phone lay. You've built this whole web of lies, Nicole. But here's the thing about lies, they collapse under pressure. Don't you dare lecture me, she snapped, her voice rising. You've been so consumed by your career that you haven't noticed what's been happening right under your nose. I laughed, shaking my head. Oh, I've noticed. And unlike you, I've been preparing. Nicole's face flushed with anger, but she didn't respond. I leaned in, lowering my voice. You think you've won, but the game isn't over, Nicole. Not by a long shot. That night, I sat in my office, reviewing the latest updates from Derek and James. The evidence was overwhelming: financial mismanagement, fraudulent transfers, explicit emails outlining their plans. Nicole and Marcus had overplayed their hand, and now it was my turn to strike. As I shut my laptop, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, the path forward was clear. Nicole and Marcus thought they could dismantle my life and walk away unscathed. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. By Friday morning, the tension in the house was palpable. Nicole moved through the kitchen with deliberate precision, her back stiff as she prepared her tea. I sat at the table with my coffee, pretending to read the paper but watching her every move. "Are you working late tonight?" she asked, her tone clipped. "No," I said simply. "I'll be home." She didn't respond, but her hands tightened around the teacup. It was a small tell, but it confirmed what I suspected. Nicole was waiting for something, and whatever it wasn't good. At the office, I met with Derek to finalize our next steps. He handed me a thick folder, his expression one of grim satisfaction. "This is it," he said. "Everything we need to dismantle her custody claim and expose the financial misconduct. The judge will see right through her narrative," he added. I flipped through the documents, each page a nail in the coffin of Nicole's carefully constructed story. Photos of her with Marcus, records of their secret accounts, transcripts of emails that read like a blueprint for betrayal. It was all there. "And backer?" I asked, looking up at Derek. "His attorney filed a motion to quash the subpoenas," Derek said, smirking. "But it's weak. The judge will likely deny it. He's scrambling, Logan. He knows the walls are closing in." "Good," I said, my voice steady. "Let him squirm." That afternoon, James Dutton called with an unexpected update. "Nicole's been making moves," he said, his tone tense. "She met with Backer yesterday at a hotel, of course. They spent an hour in his suite, arguing." "Arguing?" I asked, my interest piqued. "Yeah, my source says it got heated. Something about him pulling out of their arrangement. He's panicking, Logan. I think he's cutting her loose." I let out a slow breath, the weight of James's words sinking in. Backer abandoning Nicole wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a strategic disaster for her case. Without him, her financial house of cards would collapse entirely. "Keep me updated," I said. "And James, dig deeper. I want to know exactly what Backer is planning." When I got home that evening, Nicole was waiting in the living room, her arms crossed and her expression guarded. "We need to talk," she said. "By all means," I replied, setting my briefcase down and taking a seat. Nicole hesitated, clearly unsure of how to start. Finally, she sighed. "I know you've been looking into things, and I think it's time we stop playing games." I raised an eyebrow. "Games?" "Yes, Logan. This isn't good for Emily. We're both better than this." "Better than what, Nicole?" I asked, leaning forward. "Better than lying? Cheating? Stealing? Please, enlighten me." Her face flushed with anger. "Don't act like you're innocent in all this. You've been distant for years, wrapped up in your work, ignoring what's happening at home. What did you think would happen?" "What did I think?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I thought I was building a life for us, for our family. I thought I was giving you everything you wanted. Clearly, I was wrong." Nicole glared at me, her composure fraying. "Fine. If you want to fight, we'll fight. But don't think you'll come out of this unscathed." I stood, meeting her glare with one of my own. "You have no idea what you're up against, Nicole. But you're about to find out." That night, I called James. "She's on the defensive," I said. "She knows I'm coming for her." "Good," James replied. "Because we've got another lead. Backer is liquidating assets. Fast. He's clearly trying to cut ties before things blow up. You want us to press him?" I asked without hesitation. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "Apply pressure. Make him sweat. And James, find out if he's planning to run. I want to know his every move." Over the weekend, Nicole grew more restless. She avoided me as much as possible, spending hours on the phone or locked in the bedroom. Emily, sensing the tension, clung to me whenever I was home. Her presence was a constant reminder of why I couldn't afford to lose. On Sunday evening, James called again. "He's abandoning ship. Does Nicole know?" I asked. "Unclear. But if she doesn't, she'll find out soon enough." I leaned back in my chair, a grim smile spreading across my face. Backer running was the final piece of the puzzle. Without him, Nicole's entire plan would fall apart. She wanted a fight. I said, "Let's give her one." The courtroom was quieter than I expected. The kind of silence that feels loaded, like the air before a storm. Nicole sat at the plaintiff's table. Her attorney, Victor, whispering hurried instructions into her ear. She looked composed, but I could see it, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she avoided looking my way across the aisle. I sat with Derek, a stack of meticulously prepared evidence in front of us. This wasn't just a defense. It was a dismantling. The judge entered, and everyone rose when the proceedings began. It was clear Victor had chosen the wrong approach. His opening arguments painted Nicole as a devoted mother abandoned by a husband too consumed by his work. It was a weak narrative, one that ignored the mountain of evidence we were about to unleash. Derek stood, his calm confidence filling the room. "Your Honor," he began, "the plaintiff's portrayal of my client as a distant, neglectful husband is not only inaccurate, but entirely contradicted by the facts." He handed a file to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. "These are documented instances of Mr. Creighton's involvement in his daughter Emily's life. Coaching her soccer team, attending parent-teacher conferences, even planning her birthday parties." As the judge flipped through the file, I could see Victor's facade beginning to crack. This wasn't the battle he had anticipated. Derek continued, detailing every moment I had invested in Emily's life, proof that Nicole's version of events was far from the truth. Every page, every photograph, every testimonial from colleagues and friends further cemented the image of a dedicated father who had been actively involved in his daughter's life. Nicole's grip on her case was slipping, and I was only getting started. "This is not the behavior of an absent father," Derek continued, his voice unwavering as he addressed the judge. He could see the subtle shift in Nicole's demeanor, the carefully constructed mask beginning to crack. Victor shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the tension in the room grew thick. "And then there's the matter of Mrs. Creighton's financial activities," Derek said sharply, his words landing with a force that was almost palpable. "Bank records show a clear pattern of funds being siphoned from joint accounts into private ones over the course of a year. These funds were then funneled into a shared account with Mr. Marcus Backer." Nicole's face flushed, the blood draining from her features as her carefully maintained composure shattered in front of everyone. Derek wasn't finished. "We also have correspondence between Mrs. Creighton and Mr. Backer," he added, handing another folder to the bailiff. "Emails detailing their plans to financially and emotionally dismantle Mr. Creighton's life. This includes attempts to alienate his daughter and accusations designed to undermine his reputation in court." The judge's expression darkened as she flipped through the evidence, absorbing the details of Nicole's betrayal. Victor, clearly scrambling, stood to object. "Your Honor, we dispute the relevance of this." Derek cut him off smoothly, his confidence unwavering. "Relevance, Your Honor, is that these actions speak directly to the plaintiff's credibility and intentions in this case. This is not a mother protecting her child. This is a woman executing a calculated scheme." The judge raised her hand, silencing Victor. "You may proceed, Mr. Riker." Derek nodded and continued. "Finally, we submit evidence that Mrs. Creighton was aware of Mr. Backer's fraudulent financial dealings and actively participated in hiding assets. These actions have serious implications for her fitness as a parent." Nicole visibly paled, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if to steady herself. She turned to Victor, whispering frantic words, but it was clear there was no escaping the fallout. By the time Derek finished presenting our case, Nicole's world had crumbled. The judge ordered a recess, and Nicole hurried out of the courtroom, her composure completely shattered. I followed at a distance, watching as she leaned against the hallway wall, struggling to steady her breathing. When she saw me, her eyes filled with a mix of rage and desperation. "You did this," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You destroyed everything." I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. "No, Nicole. You destroyed everything. I just made sure you didn't get away with it." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out. But instead, she slumped against the wall, defeated. "Marcus left," she whispered, her tears streaking her mascara. "He took everything. I felt no pity for her, not anymore. You chose him over our family, over Emily. And now, you've lost everything." Nicole stared at me, her expression hollow, empty. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned in, my voice cold and steady. "Now, you face the consequences. The court will decide custody, but after today, it's clear who Emily belongs with. You'll lose the house, and the financial mismanagement will follow you for years." Nicole didn't respond, only stared at the floor as her tears fell freely. When the recess ended, Nicole's attorney pushed for a settlement. The terms were harsh. I retained full custody of Emily, the house, and the majority of our shared assets. Nicole would be left with a modest allowance, just enough to get by, but not enough to rebuild the life she'd carelessly destroyed. The judge approved the settlement, her final remarks cutting through the room like a knife. Mrs. Creighton, your actions have shown a blatant disregard for your family and this court. Consider this outcome a mercy. Nicole didn't meet my eyes as the proceedings concluded. She left the courtroom without a word, her shoulders hunched and her world in tatters. Later that evening, as I sat with Emily in our quiet home, I felt a strange sense of peace. The storm was over. The damage had been contained. Nicole had tried to break me, to take everything I held dear, but in the end, she had only destroyed herself. Emily looked up at me, her eyes full of trust. Dad? Yeah, are we going to be okay? I smiled, pulling her close. Yeah, kiddo, we're going to be just fine. And for the first time in weeks, I truly believed it. If you enjoyed the story, please like and subscribe to the channel.